Addict named Christopher. You know what I'm loving about my journey, my biblical quest, and tracking the Israelites' exile to their return is that Daniel threw me into the book of Maccabees. And what you find is that in the book of Maccabees is that the temple of Jerusalem goes through a second rebuilding. I'll just see it as a refurbishing, really. But it's a second rebuilding of the temple that doesn't get talked about. Because what we know for a fact is that when the Persians came in and pushed the Babylonians out of Jerusalem, Cyrus the Great reconstituted and repatriated the Israelites back to Jerusalem. Okay? They allowed Israel back into Jerusalem to rebuild the city, rebuild the temple, rebuild the walls, and get back to their ways of living. Under Cyrus the Great, he allowed Zerubbabel to rebuild the temple of Jerusalem. Later on down the king's list of Persia, when we get to Artaxerxes, he allowed Ezra to reinstitute the laws and the teachings of Judaism. And under the same Artaxerxes, he allowed Nehemiah to return to Jerusalem and rebuild the walls. Nehemiah, when you study the history, was Artaxerxes' cupbearer. What I respect about the Persians is that they respected each other's requests and permission and orders and decrees to allow Israel back into Jerusalem and rebuild themselves. So Nehemiah returns to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem. Okay? When the Greeks come in, they follow under the same traditions of the Persians, okay? To allow Israel to govern themselves, to, worship their God. Real good stuff until Antiochus the Fourth Epiphanes, until he comes in, okay? A whole story around that. I'm going to just skip to the point. Antiochus ushers in a general by the name of Apollonius of Syria, and he destroys the temple walls, the walls of Jerusalem, the fortresses of Jerusalem, and then sets up this half-tail, fortress called Acra around Jerusalem. Yeah. But this is after Nehemiah had rebuilt the walls. Okay? Artaxerxes the Persian allows Nehemiah to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem. When the Greeks come in and push the Persians out, they destroy the walls again. And when the Maccabean revolt kicks in, and when they siege an area called Beth Shore, BETH slash SURE. When they sieged that area, they pushed back into Jerusalem and reconquests the temple. Okay, reconquest the temple. And under them, they rebuild the walls, tear down the abomination of desolation that Antiochus set up, that Jesus predicted would be set up. I believe in Matthew 24, he predicted it. Well, he talked about it at least later, because this is before. So I love the history of, the Maccabees. I love where it's taken me so far. But this is a piece of the scripture that isn't mentioned, because you don't find it in your Protestant Bibles. You find it in your Catholic Bibles and your Eastern Orthodox scriptures, because they honor the Deuteronomical, or the Apocrypha, if you will, which contains these other books. And so there was a second rebuilding of the second temple that you won't know about. But I'm on my break. We only got 20 minutes. I'm not going to get too deep into it, but I just think it's a real interesting piece of history. I think, it expands your understanding. And if you ask, what does that history do for you spiritually? What's the point of learning about it? It's because it's history that reconnects you to your past, because those who don't know their history are doomed to repeat it. So it's an interesting study, interesting topic. History allows us to know what we've been through and where we've been, so that we could know what we're capable of and then know where we're going. Yeah, for me, spiritually, the history of, the Maccabees and Jerusalem have encouraged me to keep digging into the scriptures. That's, expanding my understanding of the Bible in its entirety. And in turn is increasing my spirit, exercising my spirit, man. So before you turn your nose up at these books, make sure that you know what they are and where they fall at in the scriptures before you deny them. So if you have any questions on it, on these extra books in the scriptures, leave me a message in the comments and I'll get to it and break it down to you, and perhaps bring you up, and and give you my number probably, and we'll have a Bible study on it to see what you think. Okay, addict named Christopher. Thank you for allowing me to share.